and we will see what happens. Just like lightly choked on water there. I'm fine. All right. Oh. Chapter 24. He stood unmoving, head slightly askew. His body was a total shadow that stretched unnaturally long, and his arms almost reached to his knees. His eyes weren't visible, but she knew he'd seen her. He had the forever unnerving smile slashed across his face. His grin followed her, and he took a step forward. It wasn't smooth, more like he was a stop-motion doll. Sophia squealed and veered fully into the trees. The bushes were thick and pulled at her hair and skin as she crashed through them. She dodged trees, picking her feet up and keeping her arms raised to protect her face. She knew she was still running vaguely toward the boundary of the yard. The moment she'd seen the figure, blood had rushed to her ears, blanketing all sounds, and her vision had narrowed to only what was in front of her. She plowed ahead, ignoring the blood trailing down her arms, unwilling to stop in case the grinning man materialized beside her. She reached the wall faster than expected. It was imposing, like the kind that would fortify castles in medieval Europe. It climbed up to the sky, stone stacked upon stone. She only wasted a few seconds pounding her fists in frustration. It was as high as the gate had been, and from what she could see, it ran all the way to the gate. No doubt it wouldn't be intact the whole way around the entire property. But Sophia didn't have time to run the perimeter of the property in hopes of finding a slightly shorter bit of wall. Desperately, she scanned the structure, feeling along it with her blood-crusted fingers. Age and decay were painted along the wall. Chunks of stone had fallen or were gouged out. Mortar had worn away. It was climbable. A twig snapped behind her. She knew what it was without looking around. It was the grinning man. It was the dark, devouring presence that lived deep in the woods, and it was going to gobble her up when it had tired of chasing her. It had been waiting for her to get to another dead end, and another puzzle she'd have to work her way out of. She squeezed her eyes shut. Cold fingers brushed over her neck, smooth and firm instead of sharp and jagged. She reacted instinctually, thrusting an elbow backwards and curling her spine to duck out of its grasp. Her elbow didn't make contact with anything, but the fingers on her neck loosened and slipped free. A thin log on the ground was at her feet, and Sophia snatched it up, swinging wildly in a circle. The grinning man didn't dodge, but Sophia couldn't manage to get to the grinning man within range. She wished she'd had kept another match with her, but all she had was the rotting wood. "Not me," she grunted as she swung. "Not me. I'm not dying here today." Her heart pounded and her throat burned. Tears threatened as she desperately tried to think through her panic. She was cornered, up against the wall. In order to climb, she'd have to turn her back to the grinning man, and then she was doomed. It hadn't approached her again, watching her with its chin down, smiling from ear to ear. Maybe it liked the struggle, like a spider watching the fly in its web kick itself out of energy. She'd need a head start, some way to climb above where its grasping fingers could grab her. As she backed up along the wall in the direction of the gate, her heel snagged on a root, and she felt herself falling backwards. In an instant, the grinning man had skittered towards her, reaching for her. To catch herself from falling, Sophia grabbed the nearest tree trunk. It was a young tree, not rooted in place to make the thin trunk immobile. The trunk swayed as she kept herself upright, shaking the branches stemming off of it. letting in dim sunlight shimmer to the forest floor. Immediately, the grinning man retreated. Sophia's eyes widened as she surprised herself by laughing a cruel, shrill bark at him. "Sunshine, hey?" He'd been standing in the road, so it couldn't just be the sunlight that scared him, but it was the edge that she needed for now. She could figure out the why later. Sophia took advantage of the momentary confusion and gripped the nearby branch of a neighboring tree, holding onto it with both hands. She lifted herself up, then smashed her feet down onto the branch she'd been standing on. It groaned under her attack. As she'd hoped, her weight was too much for the brittle branch to hold it and snapped, the cracking sound echoing around her. Another sliver of sunlight streamed through the new hole in the canopy. It wasn't much. She was too low to make much of a difference, but it still seemed to unnerve the shadowy man. She felt her muscles burn as she pulled herself up onto the branch she had grabbed. Desperation allowed her to ignore the sharp pain in her shoulder and swing her legs up around the limb. The bark bit into her hands as she maneuvered herself upright onto the branch. She was higher up and closer to the wall from this position. She turned, jumping for the nearest cavity to the wall. Her fingers grasped the cool stone and she swung her other arm up to the next gap. Her feet hung heavy below her, scrambling for purchase in some nook or hole. Luckily, she found a spot, putting her weight on her left foot as her right foot also found the next foothold. She reached up, ignoring the numbness in her fingers and arms, digging her fingers into the next crevice and pulling up her leg, climbing the wall. Straight adrenaline coursed through her veins, survival mode allowing her not only to think, but just do. She'd only ever climbed in high school phys ed, but she was desperate. There was no other options, and Sophia was so intent on her freedom, she didn't even think falling as her body propelled her upwards. She dated a guy once who was an avid climber, Dominic. He tried to talk her into coming along, but it was never something that appealed to her. She wished she'd given it more of a go. She was halfway up when fingers slowly and gently gripped her ankles. She looked down to see the grinning man reaching at her. Her arms locked, fingers digging into the gaping holes in the stone, and she kicked with her other leg, screaming. Again, she didn't make contact, but the grinning man surged back slightly. She started climbing again, frantic. Cool fingers again wrapped around her ankle, and she pushed herself, trying to pull herself out of her grip. Soft as a whisper, the air seemed to breathe around her. Sophia. It caressed her skin, her name drawn out through the trees. The shadowy fingers around her ankle tightened, and she felt herself slip backwards a little. She'd done so much to get to this point, she couldn't let herself be pulled down into the tangle of branches. She fought so hard. She'd left Eve, she'd left Winna. She was going to make it over the wall. With a burst of energy, Sophia ignored the burning in her arms and heaved herself up, shaking her trapped foot violently, allowing it to bang and scrape along the wall until her ankle was in a patch not covered by shade. The grip loosened once more, its aversion to the sun greater than its hunger for her. Sophia scanned for more handholds, scrambling higher until she was able to haul herself to the top of the wall. It was 1.5 feet thick, and sitting on it instead of holding herself up by her arms made Sophia bite back another relieved sob. She looked back down into the shadows of the yard. The grinning man wasn't looking up at her as she expected. He wasn't there at all. Her body shook as she breathed out, unsure whether to be worried or thankful. She straddled the wall, bracing her hands on either side to keep herself steady. The adrenaline was wearing off, and total exhaustion was setting in. The lack of water and food from the weekend, mixed with the trauma, was a lot for Sophia to deal with. She knew she had to get down soon before her energy was all gone and she wouldn't be able to lower herself. But she was free. Well, mostly free. She had to figure out how to get down without hurting herself. She dared to hope that the property line was a sort of boundary for the entity. Why else had everything seemed to work against them leaving? She didn't know how she'd cope with getting to the other side and meeting him face to face. She hissed as she rotated her ankle. A burning rash had formed where he grabbed her. The blisters were raw and angry red. She felt the back of her neck, and the skin was tender and lumpy too. She hadn't noticed before, but it burned the same as her ankle. Looking down to the other side, the ground seemed so far away. She climbed the wall without hesitation, but the feat seemed just as impossible as safely getting down. She glanced toward the trees, straining to see the house, but it was totally hidden. The forest was growing dark to obscure the horror behind. "I need to get to the road," she croaked, her throat raw after screaming. Hearing her objective seemed to be the push she needed, so Sophia carefully scanned the other side of the wall, hoping for similar handholds and broken stone to scramble down with. Her body trembled as she swung her legs over the wall and rested her torso on the top stones. She knew her arms were wobbly and exhausted, but she still had a little push still in them. Going down was harder than climbing up, even with the grinning man trying to snatch her flailing limbs. She had no idea what she was doing and struggled to find nooks to jam her toes into. Her legs ended up mostly walking down the wall, forcing her arms to support her weight. About halfway down, her foot slipped, catching her off guard. She didn't have a good grip of the stone and couldn't hold on enough to offload her weight. She skidded down the rest of the wall, scraping up more of her knees and arms before landing on her back. The wind was knocked out of her, and Sophia lay there, seeing stars and tense for a second before her lungs were able to take in air. She gulped air into her lungs, pushing herself up to sitting to inspect her body, making sure no bones were sticking out. She didn't think she'd be able to reset her own bones, so she was relieved to see she was only going to be covered in large blooming bruises from the fall. 8 feet was much easier on the body than 30. She looked around, eyes darting to every shadow, confirming the grinning man was not surging towards her. She saw no smile but below the empty eyes. She saw the shoulders relax as she exhaled. The dim afternoon seemed to bleed into this side of the property too, clouds covering most of the sky. She wasn't sure what time it was, but knew that the longer she sat, the closer to nightfall it became. There was no point sitting and wallowing over the weekend, not until she was safe and around other people. She got to her feet, ignoring the protests of her muscles, and followed the wall back to the main road. She began walking, avoiding looking backwards towards Motuk Estates in case the grinning man peered at her from beyond the gate. She dreaded the switchbacks that had been harrowing to drive down. They were going to be miserable agony to have to walk up. It was dusk when she reached the end of the switchbacks. The sun broke through the clouds in time to set the sky alight in golden glow before sinking behind the mountains, leaving a bruised blue and purple sky in its wake. Sophia's throat was dry. She was thirsty and starving and tired, but she was compelled onward by the need to survive and escape back into the safety of other humans. She felt life radiate in spirals of warmth along her skin. She reached the turnoff to the highway without further mishaps. Nothing creaked around her. No lingering feeling of unease swelled in her stomach. The grinning man seemed a horrible nightmare the farther she got from the house. She stayed to the side of the road, now that night had swept across the forest, and the world around her had become pitch dark. Stars dotted the sky above her. She'd been surprised when she first saw the 2 glowing orbs behind her coming closer. Her first thought was to run because the grinning man had found her again. But as they drew nearer, it proved to be a semi-truck hauling lumber. Sophia used up the last of her energy, waving and calling like a maniac on the side of the road. Covered in blood and dirt with her matted hair and shredded clothing, she must have looked like a walking corpse. But the driver stopped. Sophia wiped back tears when she saw the truck brake and pull to the side after it passed. She hobbled up to it, breathing heavily as she sobbed. She was getting out. Chapter 25. The driver eyed Sophia with worry, immediately offering her a bottle of water as she had climbed into the passenger seat. She was middle-aged. Her brown skin on the left of her face had become leathery from the sun exposure. She had a hat on, and her graying hair was pulled into a low braid that swooped over her shoulder. "What happened to you?" the lady asked. "How'd you get out here all alone?" Sophia assumed these questions weren't the only ones buzzing around the driver's mind. "Long story." She got out through gulps of water. She took the offered bag of chips and couldn't stop herself from gorging on the whole bag of salt and vinegar between long swigs of water. "I'm Tanya," the woman said. "Are you alone? You heard it all?" Sophia wasn't sure what she was, but she didn't have words to explain, so she mumbled a quiet, "No, I'm fine. I just need to get to a phone." Tanya nodded and pursed her lips. Sophia wasn't sure if the woman was going to push her further on details. But she knew that once she started speaking, she would have to relive it all, and she wasn't ready for it. Tanya still watched Sophia warily, but Sophia didn't offer further comment. Instead, she sat back, breathing slowly and trying to stop her body from shaking. "Well, my girl, out here we have no service," Tanya finally responded. "I'm headed through Nordag, which will have hotels and restaurants and a medical center. I won't be getting there for another hour and a half, though. We'll be passing through Carterton in about 30. It's small, only a few people live there now. Used to be a coal mining hub or something. They'll have a gas station, though. You maybe can use a phone there and clean up a little." Sophia nodded. Her eyes already felt heavy and her body was drained. Each blink tempted her to surrender to sleep. When Sophia was prodded awake, she'd forgotten she was in a truck and not back in the house. She almost yelled out. Tanya had backed away as if Sophia were flailing around. "We're here. I'm going to get some gas, and I'll grab you something more to eat than a bag of chips. The bathroom's over there. Get cleaned up a bit, meet me back here in 5, the trucker suggested. Sophia thanked her for her generosity, allowing Tanya to help her down from the truck before limping toward the bathroom. The greenish fluorescent light flickered before remaining on, illuminated the dank, white-tiled room. The quiet buzzing of the lights in the dingy washroom would have made Sophia uncomfortable before, but now was a space without blood or maggots, without cold, dead eyes. A white moth hurled itself against the flickering light overhead, compelled to bash its pale, fragile body against the plastic cover. Sophia frowned as she saw the silhouetted carcasses of a variety of insects scattered inside the cover. The tiny dead things had found their way inside, only to realize the light was death, and they were trapped. Sophia was no longer trapped. A second moth fluttered to join the first in a futile attempt to reach the light. Its flight was more chaotic and staggered. Sophia squinted, spying a chunk missing from one of the translucent wings. She shuddered, tearing her eyes away from the light and heading to the sink. Cool water felt soothing on her skin as she dunked her hands into the stream, collecting a pool in her hand before splashing it across her face. A tingle between her shoulder blades made her pause as she filled her hands again. Sophia's heart skipped a beat, and the tingle spread, prickling down her arms. Her shoulders dropped as she stood up, looking at her reflection in the cracked mirror. She stared back at her reflection, horror welling in her stomach, weighing it down with despair. Nothing. Just her reflection. Haggard. Disheveled. Her clothes were wrinkled, torn, and dirty. Her sweater was covered in mud and dried blood. It was no longer the pretty wine color from the start of the weekend. She had a wild look in her bloodshot eyes, and her skin had taken on an ashen tone. The bags under her eyes were slightly purple, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. The lack of food and minimal water, paired with a weekend of fear pumping through her veins, had a terrifyingly transformative effect on her. Sophia was surprised Tanya had stopped to let her in the vehicle. She looked like a ghoul. Something dead. something that had crawled out of the shadows and hunted the living. She squeezed her eyes shut, taking a deep breath. She braced her hands on the sink. It was sticky, but somehow she didn't care as much as she might have a week ago. "I'm safe," she whispered to herself, her voice sandpaper against her throat. She opened her eyes again, grimacing at her reflection and clencing her jaw to keep the tears at bay. Tanya would be waiting for her. She took one last minute to prod at the hair framing her face, fussing at it to try to somehow make herself look less feral, more in control. It was no use. What she needed was more than just the hair out of her face. Sighing, she headed out of the washroom and back over to the truck. She hiked herself up into the cabin, stretching out to grasp the door and slam it shut behind her. Pulling the buckle around her, and she clicked it into place before glancing at Tanya to see what snack she had grabbed. Tanya was smiling. Her smile was too big, though, and she was slumped back in her seat with vacant eyes staring at the ceiling. Her hands were limp in her lap, and chip bags had fallen to the floor. Sophia froze. Her breathing hitched as she processed the scene. Tanya wasn't just smiling. Her jaw was lolled open, and the corners of her mouth had been cut into the elongated grin. Blood trickled down her chin. "No." Sophia's voice was flat, realizing her fate. Her face contracted into a grimace as her gaze fell to the figure lurking beneath her in the back seat. A too large grin reflected back at her in the rearview mirror. Deep and devouring, shadowy and inhuman. The grinning man smiled at her through the glass, his eyes bottomless and hungry. She hadn't escaped. She'd been doomed even as she climbed down the wall, marching up the switchbacks and walking along the road. She'd been dead since she drove into the yard. She just hadn't realized it until now. And she'd brought the entity with her. Sophia surged into action, yanking on her seatbelt, fighting to get it unclasped, even though she knew it was useless. Tears welled in her eyes and her heart pounded. The cabin lights flickered once. Twice. They went out as her belt came free. She grabbed at the handle, but the door wouldn't open. It was locked. It was too late. She felt the familiar prickle at the back of her neck as fingers tightened on her shoulder. Hungry, heavy breathing was too close. She felt it on her cheek, overwhelming her senses. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she squeezed her eyes shut. The grin. She'd seen it from the corner of her eyes. She wasn't going to get away. And then, total darkness. The end. She's still in the house. She never left. The grinning man was always there. No matter what. Nope. No epilogue. Nope. That is where we leave Sophia, and we leave the Mortok Estates behind us. A true horror, where it leaves you with a little bit of the like, is it over? Question mark? Sort of feeling. Snooze carried. Trying. What did I throw down? A monk? Monk? I feel like monks Fatangle is always into the monks being OP. Thank you guys so much for dropping all your units tonight. Jumping Bamboo getting our random reward. So you guys, that was our very first full-length contemporary novel that we have read. A huge, immense thank you to Andrea Mackenzie, the author of this story, for giving us permission to read on stream. It really was a special experience for us. Yeah, I'm very, very grateful to have been given this opportunity. And yes, yeah, feel free if you want to get your own copy of Something Dead. You can get it for Kindle, so an ebook version, and they do also print on demand. You can get a softcover or hardcover version. The cover is absolutely gorgeous, done by our very own moderator Thistle K. Oh, it has the moth crumbling into dust with the hint of the manor behind. This is just the ebook cover, so the print version does have the moth wrapping around the back as well. This is just the image that I got. So, yeah, no. Straight up spoopy thriller death trap. That's right. Very, very bleak and like such impeccable horror vibes, you know. Very, very fun. I enjoyed that a lot. A very different sort of read. So normally for our classic literature story time, obviously in the name, we read classic literature. We just got through North and South and Anne of the Island. So this is kind of we have read some like classic horror. We've done like Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde, Dracula, and stuff like The Yellow Wallpaper and things like that. But this is our first like full length story that has been, you know, start to finish, like modern, which is a really interesting challenge for me. Definitely wonderful. Yes, we always read The Raven as part of our Halloween reading. So as Fatangle mentioned, yes, Discord has a copy of the full cover done by Kay. But we also, we will have our poll for our next read going up. As I mentioned before, this is going to be a start of vacation for your old pal Snooze. So we're going to be taking a couple weeks off of some reading. But when we return in December, we will be going with our children's lit and our adult lit that we will be reading. That's based on your own votes. So I'll probably have that up by the weekend. You guys can start making your voices heard. I just need to kind of take a little look and narrow down some choices for us of what we'd like. And yeah, it has been absolutely wonderful sharing this story with you, sharing this time with you. It really means a lot. Thank you guys as well for like dropping units and throwing Pokeballs and stuff tonight. Or playing along with our side games while chilling and listening to some stories. So I will still have one more stream before vacation time. If you're wanting to keep the creepy vibes rolling, we are going to be jumping back on into Slay the Princess on Friday. For those who may be unfamiliar, it is a point and click sort of adventure. It is done by a two-person dev team, and every single piece of art is hand-drawn. And basically our quest is simple. We have to slay the princess no matter what she says. Do not believe her lies. That is our quest. But we have found that there are many, many, many paths and many layers. From the makers of one of our, like, I would say recent favorites that we played on stream, Scarlet Hollow. So yeah, if you're wanting to keep some of those creepy vibes rolling, that is what we're going to be playing. That will be at, oh gosh, time change, 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and oh gosh, what is that? 6:30 Pacific. There's 3 hours between Pacific and Eastern right now. I don't live somewhere that observes daylight savings time, so my brain has to like work overtime to think about like when is it in the year and what proximity am I to to the coasts here. Yeah, that concludes story time for today. Let's take a little look at some raid targets. There is currently a sumo basho going on, which is always fun to watch. Let's see. Let's take a little look. Actually, we have a couple of reading buddies online that I would love to go wish well. Maiko Psycho is reading right now. Oh my gosh. So that is, I think that's where we're going to go. So we're going to keep going with the reading raid. Going to go see our pal Maiko Psycho and check out what he's reading tonight. I so very much appreciate the hanging out for story time. I had an absolutely awesome read reading this one. You guys really warmed my heart. And as I said, I know Andrea has been checking out the streams as she's been able to, and has been enjoying checking it out, seeing how it is on a live stream as well. All right, you guys, as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, stay safe, know how much I appreciate you being here, and take care. Much love. Have a great rest of your night, you guys, and a great rest of your week. I will start the weekend off with you with some more creepy vibes, playing some Slay the Princess on Friday. Let's go give Maiko Psycho our love. I will see you soon. Bye.